Despite a blatant attempt to suppress the vote, Republican gubernatorial candidate Brian Kemp still might not be able to win because when you look at public polling data, you'll find that his Democratic opponent, Stacey Abrams, is statistically tied with him. So that state is a toss-up, and as a result, Brian Kemp is getting desperate. Now, he's already pulled out all the stops in order to make sure that he disenfranchises black voters who would otherwise vote for Stacey Abrams, but now he is accusing the Democratic Party in the state of Georgia of committing fraud in a last-ditch effort to maybe pull off a win. Now, as Richard L. Hasen of Slate reports, Georgia's Secretary of State Brian Kemp, who is running for governor while simultaneously in charge of the state's elections, has accused the Democratic Party without evidence of hacking into the state's voter database. He plastered a headline about it on the Secretary of State's website, which thousands of voters use to get information about voting on Election Day. It's just the latest in a series of partisan moves by Kemp, who has held up more than 50,000 voter registrations for inconsistencies as small as a missing hyphen, fought rules to give voters a chance to prove their identities when their absentee ballot applications are rejected for a lack of a signature match, and been aggressive in prosecuting those who have done nothing more than try to help those in need of assistance in casting ballots. But the latest appalling move by Kemp to publicly accuse the Democrats of hacking without evidence is even worse than that. Kemp has been one of the few state election officials to refuse help from the federal government of Homeland Security to deter foreign and domestic hacking of voter registration databases. After computer scientists demonstrated the insecurity of the state's voting system, he was sued for having perhaps the most vulnerable election system in the country. His office has been plausibly accused of destroying evidence which would have helped to prove the vulnerabilities of the state election system. If anyone is to blame for vulnerabilities with the voting system, it is Kemp, and now he's trying to turn those vulnerabilities into crass political advantage by blaming Democrats without evidence for the state's failings. The press release entitled, "After Failed Hacking Attempt, Secretary of State Launches Investigation into Georgia Democratic Party," provides no details. It quotes a spokesperson saying, quote, "While we cannot comment on the specifics of an ongoing investigation, I can confirm that the Democratic Party of Georgia is under investigation for possible cybercrimes." So he has absolutely no shame. And at this point, I feel like this is comical. There was an Onion article that really described the situation in Georgia, I think pretty aptly, in saying that Brian Kemp was feeling enthusiastic about the fact that he suppressed a lot of votes or something along those lines. I'll go ahead and put that on the screen so you can see it. But, I mean, he is making this huge allegation and accusation against the Democratic Party in Georgia and trying to implicate his Democratic opponent, Stacey Abrams, but he's just throwing up that flashy headline, and he's not really willing to give you any details, probably because he doesn't have any details. And furthermore, he rejected help from the Department of Homeland Security in increasing cybersecurity. Now, regardless as to how vulnerable you feel our elections are, if you get the offer to have your cybersecurity in your state increased and protect the votes and protect voter databases, you have absolutely no incentive to reject that. But Brian Kemp decided to do that unilaterally and now, after rejecting the Department of Homeland Security's help in increasing their state cybersecurity, he's blaming Democrats for a cyber attack. I mean, this guy has absolutely no shame. Now, of course, that leads to the question as to why he'd launched this investigation if seemingly he has no reason or no evidence to prove that Democrats are in fact guilty of a cyber attack. I mean, clearly, there's value for him in doing this 2 days before the election, but he still has to have at least some basis for creating this investigation. There has to be something, even if it's a stretch. And as CNN's Katie Harding explains, Well, it was in fact a stretch, because this is what he is supposedly basing this investigation off of.
It was a series of email communications they received that looked to them like two Democratic operatives discussing a plan to try to attack vulnerabilities within the state's voter registration database, and it also included the computer programming script to do so. But as it turns out, there was an email that preceded those that the Secretary of State's office didn't initially get, and that was an email from a concerned citizen who reached out to the state's voter protection hotline that is run by the Democratic Party to make them aware of these vulnerabilities that he sort of stumbled upon when he was checking out the status of his own voter registration information.
So in short, as we suspected, this is a complete non-issue, and he's using this investigation as a launching point for a new attack on his opponent, Stacey Abrams. He's trying to imply and get the people of Georgia to think, well, it's not me who's actually been suppressing the vote here and who's the real fraud, it's my opponent, Stacey Abrams. So in effect, this is the old argument we all used in elementary school. I know you are, but what am I? Because that's what we're seeing here. He's trying to change the narrative from him not being the fraud, and Democrats are actually the fraud in this state. They're the ones committing a cyber attack, when in actuality, he has no evidence for this. So this is a last-ditch effort to maybe pull out a victory after bungling what should be, theoretically, an easy race for someone like Brian Kemp to beat. I mean, Georgia is a red state, so a Republican should be able to win, no problem. But even after he's tried to suppress the vote, well, polls are still showing that this race is a toss-up. Stacey Abrams could very well pull this off. So this is nothing more than a political witch hunt, and this is exactly the sentiment that Stacey Abrams echoed in an interview on CNN recently.
It's a witch hunt that was created by someone who is abusing his power. Friday, Brian Kemp was notified that there was yet another flaw in the election security system. Twice before, he has accidentally released the information of 6 million Georgians. This was about to happen again. Instead of owning up to it, taking responsibility, and seeking a way to fix the flaw, he instead decided to blame Democrats because he does that.
So there you have it. Brian Kemp is getting increasingly desperate. So all you can do if you live in the state of Georgia is defeat this fraud. Show up to the polls, bring your friends with you, vote against this fraud who has done everything in his power to disenfranchise voters, and regardless of the outcome of the election, win or lose, there should be an investigation into Brian Kemp for what he did here, because he has blatantly tried to suppress the vote, and the end result of that is that he disenfranchised thousands of African American voters. And not just African Americans. I mean, he disenfranchised whites as well, but I mean, the target has been black voters, individuals in that state who are overwhelmingly likely to come out and support Stacey Abrams. So hopefully Stacey Abrams can pull this out, because a fraud like Brian Kemp does not deserve to be in power and shouldn't be in power, because clearly he's not looking out for the people of Georgia. He's looking out for his own political career.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.